Hey, hello. How's everybody doing? Just want to jump on a minute early to admonish Leanne. You are not allowed to have a bad day, a bad week, or a bad semester, right? So I want everybody to help me by getting in the chat bar and telling Leanne that she is not going to have a bad day today. Okay? It's always good to see you, Leanne, and you always make me smile. Just remember, we have to look for the positive in life rather than the negative. There's always some positive if you look hard enough, right, Ashley? Ashley's all about the positive. I like her. She's always smiling for some reason. Hello, Dee Dee. It's good to see you as well. I know. Remember, thinking is a habit, and we have to develop healthy habits. So, thinking positively is a habit. So try to train yourself to do that. I know it's tough, but you have to. You know, I try to think positively even this semester, which is terrible for me. This is a horrible semester for me. But I've decided that doggone it, I'm going to have a good semester no matter what happens. There you go. Some pumpkin spice latte. There you go. Got to stay positive. There you go, Lane. That's what I want to hear. Got to stay positive. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Did anybody do anything fun? Etta, back to the mountains, the beach. Anybody else? I actually went down to Myrtle Beach for the weekend to see a friend of mine and wound up at some really redneck honky-tonk bar in Murrells Inlet, of all places. Walked in there, our party, we all walked in there with our masks on, and everybody turned around, and I was like, uh-oh, this is one of those no mask kind of places, right? That you'll find down in South Carolina. Holy cow. Ooh, Lane played a little soccer. Sweet. Ooh, wow. That's an interesting thought, Ashley. That is a very, very interesting thought. Because, I know that kids look right up in here. This is where we learn to start focusing early in life. So I guess maybe it's the eyes. That's a hell of a scientific question, Ashley. I don't know. Of course, most of the time babies are with their parents that maybe don't have masks on. That is a great question, though. You won't forget the fusiform gyrus. Okay, right. Somebody in class, tell all the students who weren't in my class last semester what the fusiform gyrus is responsible for. Hi, Doug. Good to see you, too. Wow, we've got a great class. 18 out of 44 students. Not bad for a live Tuesday lecture. Remember, we are lecturing this week, Tuesday and Thursday only. We're going to go back to our Monday, Wednesday schedule next week, but we had to switch it up just a little bit this week. So it's today at 1 o'clock. Of course, you're here. You know that. And it's this Thursday at 11 o'clock because I had my first doctor's appointment on Wednesday. So, Leanne, when you're thinking about having a bad day, just remember where I'll be tomorrow, and your day couldn't be that bad, right? So put a smile on that face and have a good day, okay? Cool. All right, fantastic. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to switch. I've had all the preliminary appointments, all the consultations, everything. It's the first dose of poison is coming tomorrow, starting at 12:45, and then I'll be throwing up on Thursday morning. Yeah, baby. So I'm looking forward to. I like to think of it as my weight loss program for the spring. You wanted to lose 15 pounds? Well, here it is, Chris Roddenberry. I'm going to take these lemons and make lemonade this semester because I refuse to be a pessimist. So let's go ahead and get started, if we can, with the lecture. Okay, so chapter 2. So last week we talked sort of about an introduction to what developmental psychology is, and really the first place to start, and I talked to you about the nature versus nurture debate. The first place to really start a developmental psych class is talking a little bit about genetics and genetic testing. Now, I am not a biology major or a biology teacher, so I'm going to give you the social psychologist lecture on genetics and genetic testing. I know we have a lot of nursing and health students in here, so if anybody wants to help out in the chat bar by telling Dr. Roddenberry something he doesn't know, I am more than happy to listen to something from somebody who knows more than I do. Okay? How Had that small thing. You know, I did have that, right? I wonder if I still got that down here. Oh, check it out. Boom. I've got my disclaimer right down there. Right? This is from last week. You know what? Let me go ahead and, not a license, not a, oh, I can't do that. I forgot. When I do that, it changes the thing. I can't do that. That's a funny joke today. So we're going to talk a little bit about an evolutionary developmental perspective. We're going to talk about the basics of genetics, genes, chromosomes, autosomes versus chromosomes, genotype versus phenotype. We're going to talk about the basics of genetic expression, dominant recessive genes, sex-linked genes, genetic imprinting, polygenetic inheritance, and we're going to talk a little bit about chromosome and gene-linked abnormalities. Oh my goodness. Leanne went and read some, so she's ready to hear some more today. Well, good. Hopefully I've got something interesting to tell you. If not, I'll do my best. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard natural selection, Darwin's theory of natural selection, and this sort of explains the process of intergenerational morphological and behavioral adaptation that occurs as a result of competition for scarce resources. I don't know if you remember hearing about Charles Darwin, but he floated around the world on the HMS Beagle for 7 years and was interested in how animals varied so much from place to place. And he began to come upon an insight that animals evolved to fit their environments. And what he believed was that in any species, more offspring are created than can possibly survive. And these offspring, he didn't know how, the mechanism, but he knew that there were variations among these species. So some birds are born with long beaks, some birds are born with short beaks, just like some of you people are born tall, some are born short. And he found that this variation helped some animals in their competition for scarce resources. And when an animal had an adaptation, a variation that helped them compete for these scarce resources, that they tended to survive into adulthood better than the animals that had the poor variation. And that these selection pressures caused the gene pool to change. He didn't call it the gene pool at the time, but these caused the gene pool to change, and that animals started to change behaviorally and morphologically. And this became sort of the bedrock of natural selection and the theory of evolution. Now, evolutionary psychology believes that these same forces that cause people's bodies to change also affect psychological development. And from time to time, we're going to revisit the evolutionary perspective in the field of developmental psychology. So evolutionary psychology is the branch of psychology that seeks to explain human biology and behavior in terms of natural selection. All right, so if you look right below me, you'll notice that as we evolved from the lowly lemur to the rhesus monkey and gibbon to the orangutan and the chimpanzee and the gorilla and the human, you will notice that brain size really starts to increase as we move from the simpler monkey species up to the very intelligent monkey species that you see sitting in front of you here on YouTube right now. And not only did the brain get bigger, but the outer cortex became more wrinkled. The lemur's brain is fairly smooth on the outside, and the human brain on the outside is very, very wrinkly. And you might ask your question, how did this morphological change occur? Okay, so one of the things you can say is that large brains tend to provide more computational power, which is a selective advantage for the biologically weak human being. If you think about it, human beings aren't fast, we aren't very strong, we can't fly, and in fact, a good-sized squirrel could probably kick your ass on any given day. But you know why we rule the world? Because our brain is so big and we're so clever and we're so devious. So these morphological changes gave us selective advantages. We had better spatial maps for improved hunting. Look at that. I didn't even realize it, but facial recognition circuits like the fusiform gyrus that allowed us for to have better social organization. So we became better at remembering where we put stuff, and also for recognizing faces, which allowed us to organize into cooperative groups. Maybe one of us couldn't take on a woolly mammoth, but if 10 or 15 or 20 of us got together and came up with a devious plan and knew where to find a woolly mammoth, we could then kill one and eat one, and it would give us a selective advantage. So this is the morphological change that you see as we move up the species from lemur all the way to human being. Now, because of this large brain, there was some limitations. The brain can only be so large and pass through the birth canal. So human beings had to develop with brains that weren't quite done. In fact, last semester I talked about myelination, the growth of fatty tissue in the brain, as being one of those changes that occurs after birth. And so humans are born pretty stinking useless and helpless, even more helpless than we already are. And so because of this morphological change that was necessary, humans developed an evolutionary adaptive behavioral change. So now humans and infants, actually a lot of mammals, have this sort of attachment, which this close relationship that develops between a primary caregiver and an infant, that allows the infant to survive until it develops the abilities to take care of itself. So when an ant, when a snake, when a frog's born, the mother may or may not even be there, but certainly doesn't provide the kind of care and attention that that developing infant might need. And so this evolutionary morphological change caused us to change in sort of a behavioral way. And so evolutionary developmental psychology is interested in how biological and behavioral changes relate to our functioning as human beings. Exactly, Crystal. This is why cats are better as babies than real babies. Good point. As a guy who had 2 kids, I can tell you that they are I love them to death. I love both of my boys, but they were such a pain in the ass. And in fact, I would say fatherhood is the greatest thing that I never, ever want to do again, right? Good point. Okay, so how exactly are these morphological changes transmitted from generation to generation? Now, something that maybe Charles Darwin wasn't clearly aware of because the science hadn't developed yet, yeah, right, Etta, was the idea of genes and how the details of how genes and genetics are transferred. So what I'd like to do today is give you a little bit of a discussion of genes and genetics. Now, what you see below me are karyotypes. This is a picture of your chromosomes. Human beings have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 in total, and you notice that down below me in the blue square is the karyotype of a male, and in the down, let's see, sort of diagonally to me, is the karyotype of the female. Now, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. The first 22 are what we call autosomes. These are the chromosome pairs that are not associated with sex. However, the sex-determining region of the human genome of the karyotype is located on the 23rd pair in a place called the SRY, or SDR, the sex-determining region of the Y, the SRY, the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome. And so you look beneath me, the 23rd pair on the male has an X chromosome and a little funky shaped Y chromosome. For the females, in the 23rd pair, they're going to have 2 X chromosomes. Okay, some of my woman genes are broken. Very funny. Interesting point, Crystal. I guess you are going to be the, both of you Crystals or Crystal Bishop, you are going to be my comic relief for the day. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, what do we have on this karyotype? These chromosomes are thread-like structures made up of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, as you may have heard before. And DNA is a complex double helix molecule that contains genetic information. Now, chromosomes, we have 23 chromosomes, 23 chromosome pairs, so 46 chromosomes. And on these 23 pairs of chromosomes are somewhere around 30,000 genes. And the genes are the actual units of hereditary information that transmit the genetic instructions and create proteins. These genetic instructions determine whether or not you're going to have a head, 2 arms, 10 fingers, 10 toes. If you get on the 23rd pair, it's going to determine whether or not you have a vagina or a penis. And these genes are also going to create proteins so that you can burn energy, build things, and do things. So genes are what have the instructions for who you are and what you're going to look like. And genes also create proteins that do things for you. The complete set of genes contained in your chromosomes is called your genome. And there's about 30,000 genes. Now, this is not going to be on the class because it wasn't in the book, but I've been told that you share about 80% genetic similarity with a mouse. I bet you say, holy cow, 80% genetic similarity with a mouse? Think about it though. Just like a mouse, you have 2 hands and 2 feet. Just like a mouse, you have a stomach. Just like a mouse, you have a heart. Just like a mouse, you have a brain, 2 ears, and 2 eyes. You are 80% genetic similar to a mouse. You know what? I've also heard that's why they do experiments on mice. Absolutely. And even though we aren't 100% genetic similarly 100%, we're close enough genetically that there are comparisons that we can make. I've heard that the genetic similarity between an ape and a human being is 99%. And if you've ever looked at a monkey or an ape down at the zoo, we are pretty stinking similar to them, right? And so we're in the similarity between you and me is 99.9%. There's only 1/10 of 1% that differentiates between all the human beings in the world. And if you think about it, genes do similar things for similar organizing. And of course, Crystal is part cat. And I'm not even going to go anywhere with jokes on that. Okay, so the Human Genome Project. It's been only recently before we could figure out what all these genes were. And the Human Genome Project, I think they started it in the 90s, mapped all of the genes in the human genome. And this allowed us to provide research and treatment opportunities. And if you've ever heard on the news, oh, they found a new gene that's responsible for this disorder, or for this depression, or for this quality, it's probably related back to the Human Genome Project. Now, the first Genome Project took over 10 years to map all the genes in the human genome. The first time they did it, it took forever. But recently, they've created ways to quickly sequence entire genomes. So although the early attempts at genome sequencing took up to 10 years, now entire genomes can be sequenced in only 1 day. And by finding out all the genes that are on you, Crystal Bishop, or on you, Leanne, or on you, Etta, or you, Stephanie, we can then begin to go in and look and see what specific genes are related to what specific disorders or what specific qualities in humans. And there are different ways that they use this genome sequencing. So the genome-wide association method, by comparing the genomes of people with and without diseases, they can identify genetic markers, which are areas in the genes that may be associated with specific diseases. So they can find out, like I said, we're all 99.9% related. They can look at that 1/10 of 1% and begin to see where generally speaking, disorders and human qualities are located. Now, you can then take people who are identical twins or siblings, and if you they're even more similar than 99.9% related, because you can look at offspring that have even more similarity. You can actually, as researchers, identify specific genes related to specific disorders. So now that we've learned how to sequence the entire genome, we can find areas on the genomes where disorders are located. And then after we do that, we can take siblings who may or may not have a disease and compare their even more similar genome to find out exactly where genes are located that might be related to psychological and biological disorders. And there's even the 1000 Genomes project started in 2008, which is where they started to look at genetic variation among people from different ethnic groups around the world. And in a moment of solidarity among races and ethnicities, I want you to understand that we are far more similar than we are different. Sometimes people look at skin color or nationality and make gross generalizations about people from other groups. But you know what, people? We are way more similar than we could ever be different. So don't let something like skin color or hair color or nationality cause you to think of somebody as being different or not cool, right? So, genes can be turned off. There are more genes than proteins, so we know that genes actually have to collaborate to create proteins. There's not a one-to-one link between genes and proteins. So actually, the idea of locating one gene and finding out about one protein or one trait is far too simplistic. Genes actually work interactively to create proteins. And you know what? Genes can be turned on and off by environmental factors. So even though we can now use linkage analysis to find specific genes that may be related to disorders, I'm going to tell you that the story is even more complex than that. Yes, it is, Crystal, that we have to have that disclaimer in 2021. And you know what? My family comes from southern Georgia and Alabama. So I can tell you from experience that I have friends and family who do not seem to understand that very simplistic biological point. Now, we all have genes. Now, you notice we have 23 pairs of genes, and I'm sure you folks all heard this in biology class, but you get half of your genes from your mom and half of your genes from your father. Sexual reproduction allows us to combine genes and create variations that are useful for our species to survive. So we get tall people and short people, blonde people, brown-haired people, people with light skin, people with dark skin, and this allows us to adapt to the environments that we find ourselves in. So the first thing you need to understand is the difference between genotype and phenotype. You get 23 pairs of genes, one pair, 23 genes from your mom, 23 genes from your dad. Those represent your genetic instructions. Now, the reason you get some genes from your mom and some genes from your dad is so that you can express the gene that is most useful for your environment. So your phenotype is what you ultimately look like in a person. So I'll bet you in biology class you probably learned about brown hair and blonde hair and brown eyes and blue eyes. And you probably heard that brown eyes were dominant over blue eyes, and that brown hair was dominant over blonde hair. And that means that relates to the dominant recessive principle. Yes, Kinsey, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I actually drove through South Carolina this weekend, and Lord, I saw some social indicators of the same things that I saw in Georgia and Alabama as a young boy. Holy cow. There you go. Leanne remembers doing the squares. Absolutely. You got the big B, the little b, right? And in fact, so actually, let's go to the whiteboard for a minute, right? And so you got this. Your dad, let's see, your dad over here, he gives you a brown hair gene. Your mom gives you a blue hair gene. Let's say you have 4 kids and your dad has brown hair. which is your heterozygous. So big B is the trait for brown hair, little b is the trait for blonde hair, and your mother, let's say she happens to be blonde, so blonde being a recessive trait. If your trait, so dominant recessive says if you get two genes that have the different trait, one of those traits will dominate the other. So dad has brown hair, and he's heterozygous because he doesn't have the same gene. He has a brown hair gene and a blonde hair gene. But dad actually turns out to be brown hair because brown is dominant over blonde. So this is his genotype. And up here, the brown hair is his phenotype, what he actually looks like. Mom, on the other hand, has a blonde gene and a blonde gene that she got from both of her parents. Now, these, since blonde is a recessive trait, the only time we see blonde hair, the blonde phenotype, is if you are homozygous, have two blonde genes, right? Now, let's say they have 4 kids, and let's say the dad gives a brown hair gene, and the mom gives a blonde hair gene. This child is heterozygous for hair color, but since they have a dominant trait and a recessive trait, this is going to be a brown hair child. But the second child gets 2 little b's. So a blonde gene from the mom and a blonde gene from the dad. This child is what we would call homozygous genetically, and this kid's going to turn out to have blonde hair. Now they have the third child. The mom gives a blonde gene, and the dad gives a brown hair gene. The genotype for this kid is heterozygous brown hair, and this kid's going to turn out to have brown hair as well. And then the fourth kid, the mom gives a blonde gene, and the dad gives a brown gene, a blonde gene. This child is homozygous for the blonde trait. Their genotype is homozygous for blonde, and this child turns out to be a blonde. This child is blonde, and this child is brown. Does everybody remember that from? From biology class in high school? I hope you. Yes, Crystal, that's a very good comment that you made, and I'm going to let that one be private since that was more of a political statement. But yes, I would agree with you. Okay. Oh my goodness. All right, good enough. So everybody gets that. So hopefully we won't have to spend too much time on that. That's what we call the dominant recessive gene principle. So you get a gene on each of those chromosomes from your mom and your dad. And depending upon whether or not you're heterozygous or homozygous, that will determine the actual trait that you show. Now, more importantly, I want you to know about polygenetic inheritance. There are a lot of people who like to say, who don't understand transgender people or people who have alternate sexual orientations. And these people usually like to say, well, it's determined genetically. You're either an XY or an XX. What they don't understand is that sex isn't as simple as just 2 genes given from your parents. Actually, your genes, any trait you have, is not just determined by one gene. It's determined by a combination of genes. And actually, there's a cascade of genes and proteins that has to happen during prenatal development in order for you to develop into what we would call the prototypical male or the prototypical female. Now, the X and the Y genes start that cascade of processes, but genes have to be expressed at correct times during prenatal development for that baby to develop into what we would call the prototypical male or the prototypical female. And if these proteins aren't expressed at the right time, you may actually come out looking like a male on the outside, but feeling like a female on the inside. You may come out with part male traits, male biological traits, and part female biological traits. So please, please, please don't misunderstand transgender people by saying, oh, they're just making this up because you're either an XX or an XY. It is way more complex than that. Exactly right. That is the truth, Crystal. And I never understood why somebody's sexuality really has anything to do with my sexuality. A lot of my family members and friends from the Deep South seem very, very upset when somebody doesn't develop like they do. And frankly, I don't care what your sexuality is. I know what mine is, but there are people in the world who don't feel that way. And I just don't understand. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get up on my soapbox. But the point I want you to understand is that traits aren't really just created by one gene. There are cascades of genes and proteins that cause the development of your final phenotype. Okay, there you go, Stephanie. And I think we are all wonderful as we are created. So you feel confident being the person that you are, and I will be confident being the person that I am. And just because I feel myself to be completely heterosexual does not mean anything about you feeling bisexual or homosexual or somebody feeling transsexual. Sorry, get off the soapbox, Chris. Get off the soapbox. Excuse me. Now, there are the thing is because you don't have two X chromosomes in the 23rd pair, and males have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. If a male has a particular trait that is recessive, if there's a trait that is recessive that occurs on the 23rd pair, the female will not express it because she may have a dominant trait which overrides that, and the male, since the male doesn't have a dominant trait to override that, the male may express that trait. So there are some disorders and some genes that are expressed more commonly in males than in females. And it's because in the 23rd pair, the male's X chromosome doesn't have another X chromosome to override the recessive trait that the female have. So, for example, pattern baldness more common in males than in females, and it's because it occurs on this 23rd chromosome pair. And so if I have the baldness trait, it may be passed by my mom, but she won't express it because she has a dominant trait to give her some hair on her top of her head. But my brothers, who are all bald except for me, I may cut my hair short, but I got a full head of hair, dude. I got that John Bon Jovi hair if I let it grow. But so females may be carriers, but the males may be the ones who express that trait. Yeah, I'm a big libertarian, Crystal, and I think that people ought to just shut the hell up and mind their own business. That's always been my theory too. So now, and the other quality I want you to know about is genetic imprinting. Sometimes, if you get the trait and it's not on the 23rd pair, but if you get it from your mom, you might have a different trait if it's given from your mom than if it's given from your dad. So the weird thing is, even if a trait isn't on your 23rd pair, you may express it differently if it's given to you by your mom rather than your dad. So I'd like for you to be familiar with these four sort of ways, complex ways in which genotypes turn into phenotypes. Any questions so far? I hope I'm making sense, and please forgive me if I don't have all the answers. I don't sound perfectly professional because, like I said, I am not a geneticist or a biologist. Is this making sense, though? I haven't said anything that's directly wrong, right? No judgments? Oh, you're just a fan, girl. Leanne, you always say nice things to me, and thank you. It really bolsters my self-esteem here. Now, we're going to talk about some people are born. We talk about congenital abnormalities, and we're going to talk about that. Let's see, next week when we talk about death in infancy. You know what? The most dangerous time of your life until you get into adulthood is the first year of life. That's when you're most likely to die. And it's because people are born sometimes with chromosome or genetic abnormalities which cause them to die during the first year of life. Now, a lot of chromosome and genetic abnormalities are actually terminated by miscarriage before you are ever born. But there are some chromosomal abnormalities and genetic abnormalities that result in live births. Not all of these are necessarily death sentences, but some of them do cause children to die early in life. So for this class, I want you to be familiar with the 5 chromosome abnormalities that are discussed in your book. That's a good point, Etta. That's why many cultures' first big day is a big celebration. Right, it is the most dangerous time of your life. I never really thought about that, Etta, but that is a great point. If you don't mind, I'm going to steal that point for my next semester's lecture. Ooh, good point. I might even write that on a PowerPoint. So, chromosomal abnormalities occur because you either have a missing chromosome, or you have an extra chromosome, or you have a damaged chromosome. And we'll call these collectively chromosomal abnormalities. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of Down syndrome or trisomy 21. So Down syndrome occurs when you have an extra chromosome in the 21st pair of chromosomes. Now, there are other chromosome abnormalities too, but a lot of them result in a miscarriage early in prenatal development. But Down syndrome is an extra chromosome in the 21st pair, and it leads to mild to severe intellectual disability and physical abnormalities. And you know what? This is more likely to occur in mothers who are older. So if you get pregnant after the age of 35, your risk of having a Down syndrome baby goes way up. And so that's why mothers over the age of 35 are generally considered high-risk pregnancies. Now, for this week's Wednesday night discussion, we are actually going to be talking about prenatal testing and selective abortion for children who have Down syndrome. And we're going to ask the question, what would you do if you had a prenatal test and found out that your baby had a chromosomal abnormality such as Down syndrome? What you're going to find in a lot of European countries, they have very few Down syndrome babies because most expectant mothers who discover this are encouraged to terminate their pregnancy. And we're going to talk about how you feel about that in the discussion board this week. Okay, yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting webinar. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about babies born to drug-addicted mothers. So the first 3 or 4, actually, I think all the webinars this semester are going to be very interesting, but especially next week. Now, one syndrome that a lot of people don't even know they have, it occurs in males, and it's called Klinefelter syndrome, where they have an X chromosome in their 23rd pair. And these males will sometimes grow up and they develop sort of female characteristics. Their shape might not turn out to be that normal V shape that men have. They may actually grow abnormally large breasts. In fact, I had a male student in my class several semesters ago that had Klinefelter syndrome. And these people will actually grow up and have sort of female-like characteristics, even though they identify as a male, even though everybody thinks they're a male. But this Y chromosome may actually cause some feminization of their final phenotype. One question. No, that sounds like a Marvel comic episode, Crystal Bishop. No, they haven't done that, and I don't know if that would be ethical or possible. Now, I come from the country, and I know that a mule is actually the crossing of a donkey and a horse. Did you folks know that? Now, and mules are infertile, but they are actually the crossbreeding of 2 different species. Did anybody know that, or am I the only redneck country person that knew that? Okay, you knew that from Minecraft. Close enough. Good enough. Now, there are some females that are born with damage to their second X chromosome. This is called Fragile X syndrome, and this abnormality in the X chromosome causes these females sometimes to develop intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, or excuse me, this occurs in males and females. I'm sorry, I was thinking about Turner syndrome. This causes intellectual disability, learning disabilities, or short attention span. As you see, it's more common in males than in females because they don't have the second X chromosome to overcome the recessive trait in the 23rd X chromosome for the male. Now, Turner syndrome occurs in some females who are actually missing a second X chromosome. This causes these females to have intellectual disabilities and sexual underdevelopment. And typically, when you see females who are below 5 feet, those 4.6, 4'6", 4'7" high females, a lot of these females are going to have Turner syndrome. The normal human of the species for females, I think, are almost always going to make 4'11". So if you see females below that, they may often have Turner syndrome. Now, there's a Wolfen. A Wolfen? You got to be kidding me. I'm going to Google that one after class, Madison. That one's shocking. I've never heard that one. But I'm definitely going to check that because it sounds so crazy. I just don't know. Now, there's also XYY syndrome. Now, we always think of Y's, males as being more aggressive and violent and testosterone driven than females. There, at one time, it was thought that males who had XYY syndrome were going to be the criminals and the aggressive people and the murderers. It turns out that that is not, in fact, the case. However, males with XYY syndrome will tend to grow exceptionally tall. So these are sort of the main chromosome disorders, abnormalities, that you will see in live births. And I want you to be familiar with them. On your homework and your test, I'm going to have a matching section. So on your homework, I'm going to have a matching section with the chromosomal abnormalities. And on your test, I'm going to have a matching session with your gene-linked abnormalities. Or it may be opposite. I did the questions last week. But one of your homeworks is going to have a matching with the chromosome disorders, and one of your test is going to have a matching with either the gene or the chromosome. I have one on one and one on the other. Now, some disorders are related to harmful genes, just a spot on your chromosome. The whole chromosome isn't missing. You don't have an extra chromosome, but there's either an added gene or a missing gene or a harmful gene that occurs on one of your chromosomes that leads to a disorder. There are more than 7,000 genetic disorders that have been identified. At the bottom, Tay-Sachs disease is one of those genetic disorders that leads children to die early in childhood, Tay-Sachs disease. And these children are actually born normal, but they have a deceleration of their mental and physical development. And when we talk about milestones and development early childhood, what you're going to see is that the Tay-Sachs children will start out normal, but they will actually develop backwards. They're going to start losing abilities and functions. And this usually results in death early in childhood. And this occurs in Ashkenazi Jews, typically what we call Jewish people of European descent. So we have Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews. So Jews from the Middle East and Jews from Europe. And so your European Jews are the ones who are going to experience Tay-Sachs disease. Now, with selective termination of pregnancy and the ability to identify genetic abnormalities, Tay-Sachs disease is a relatively rare genetic disorder. That's a good point. Etta, it is always, that's why inbreeding is culturally, societally, it's taboo. And it's taboo, and I'm not sure if people created these taboos for this reason, but inbreeding doesn't allow one to have the dominant healthy trait to overcome the non-dominant bad trait. And in fact, I think I remember reading when I was in history class about there being a lot of inbreeding in kings and queens and royalty back in Europe in the Middle Ages, which led to hemophilia running in some royal families. And hemophilia occurs when you have a genetic disorder. It turns out that your genes and your proteins create the clotting mechanism is a very complex mechanism that happens in blood when we get cut that prevents us from bleeding out when we are cut and start to bleed. And people who have hemophilia have difficulty creating the normal blood clots to prevent them from bleeding to death or from bruising underneath the skin. So cystic fibrosis, until the pandemic, I volunteered out at the Miracle League, helping the children with developmental disabilities. And one of the more common things that we saw was children with cystic fibrosis. And they had this glandular dysfunction that interferes with mucus production, and breathing and digestion problems are common. And I remember that these children would have to wear oxygen masks. And it was just sad to see a 7 or 8 year old child having to run around with an oxygen mask, carrying an oxygen tank to help them breathe. Diabetes, I'm sure you folks have heard about this. The body does not produce enough insulin, which causes abnormal metabolism of sugar. These children have to go on specific diets and use medication to control their sugar levels. Yeah, it breaks my heart too. It was one of the sad things to see. Huntington diseases leads to this central nervous system deterioration, causing problems in muscle coordination and mental problems. Okay. I will check that. I just saw your comment, Kenzie. If you would, send me that link. I would love to see that video so that I can share it with students next semester. PKU is a metabolic disorder that, left untreated, causes intellectual disability and hyperactivity. Children can't metabolize phenylalanine in the system. And so what they do is they do a little heel prick blood test on children a couple days after they're born to see if their phenylalanine levels are too high. If your child's phenylalanine levels are too high, it means that your child can't metabolize phenylalanine. If that builds up in your system, it can lead to cognitive declines and mental retardation. And these children have to be put on special diets that are low in phenylalanine so that they don't suffer from this. Sephardic Jews, African Americans, people of African descent sometimes have sickle cell anemia, which is a blood disorder where their little blood cells are misshapen and don't travel through their capillaries very smoothly. It's painful and can lead to heart and kidney failure, as well as decreasing the oxygen supply and creating severe joint pain. Now, bizarrely enough, genetic disorders, we might say, why do genetic abnormalities exist? It turns out that genes don't know if they're good or bad. And researchers have suggested that the same gene that causes sickle cell anemia also protects one from malaria. And so in these humid sub-Saharan African environments, malaria is a common challenge that can lead to death. And so the same gene that causes sickle cell anemia also protects one from malaria. And so this is why sometimes genes that cause problems continue to persist in populations. Okay, so it protects you from, there you go. Boom, Davina, thank you very much. A high five to you, Davina. She knew where I was going with this. Thank you very much for chiming in and making me seem like a genius. I do appreciate. That is very interesting. Spina bifida, one of the things that they tell expectant mothers, make sure you take folic acid. I'm sure all of you have heard that before, especially you females who've probably been coached about birth and birthing. They tell you to take folic acid because that helps prevent neural tube disorders. And one type of neural tube disorder is called spinal bifida. And spinal bifida causes this neural tube disorder that causes brain and spinal abnormalities. I know, Davina, you definitely should be putting the shades on because you are super cool. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to talk about this week. Remember, for your homework or test, I forget which question I put on one, but there is one that relates to a matching item for the gene link disorders on either your homework or your test. And there's a matching question for chromosomal abnormalities that's either on your homework or on your test. I want you to know the difference between dominant and recessive traits. I want you to know genetic sex-linked genes. I want you to know genetic imprinting. I want you to know what a karyotype is, and I want you to know how many genes are in the human genome. So, does anybody have a question? Are there any questions that I can answer before I log off for the day? Remember, I'm going to be in the doctor's office all day tomorrow, so I will see you Thursday afternoon at 1 p.m. for our lecture. And from what I understand, the bad effects of the medicine won't kick in till Friday morning for me. Yay. So I should be pretty good to go Wednesday night and Thursday afternoon. Oh, definitely. I wouldn't miss the webinar. Even if I'm freaking dying, Etta, I am not going to miss that webinar because I really want to hear what you folks think about selective abortion and whether or not you would do it if you found out that your baby was sick. I've got several very interesting videos that I hope you look at before you get to class on Wednesday night. And of course, you are welcome to bring your beverage of choice. I'm going to be bringing Gatorade from here on out, but I want you to bring coffee, beer, or whatever it is you feel like you need to consume in order to have a good time. Thank you very much, Crystal. You and your cats will be in my thought too. Davina, you and your smart responses will be in my thought. And I'll be thinking positive thoughts about you, Leanne, and hoping you're optimistic this week. It's great to see everybody. Take care, and I will see you Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Take care.